Well, hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today, we're exploring the people and skills challenges within the construction industry. And we're honoured to have Tim Balcon, Chief Executive Officer of the Construction Industry Training Board, to steer us through some of these complex issues. The CITB was 60 years old last year, and it's been a major stakeholder in our industry for all that time. The world, though, has changed from itinerant labour moving from employer to employer to a more static self-employed model. And the CITB under Tim has sought to reposition its values and purpose under their new recently published business plan. This plan seeks to help solve our skills challenges and position construction as our career of choice for those leaving education or seeking second employment. So Tim, no small task, and welcome to the Building Podcast.
Thank you very much, Mark, and it's great to be here. Very happy to be here as well.
I'm looking forward to exploring some of your thoughts on these challenges, which we've had for a long time. But we normally start off by giving you a chance to explain what your role is at the CITB and perhaps why the CITB exists. That's probably a good start for many.
Sure. So I'm Chief Executive of CITB, and I've been in this role now nearly 3.5 years, just under 3.5 years. And why does CITB exist? Well, CITB was originally one of 26 training boards. Instigated Industrial Training Act in 1966, I believe that was right. And CITB and ECITB are the only two statutory training boards that's left before. And it's because there is a market failure in training, or a perceived market failure in training in construction and engineering construction, which is the rationale as to why CITB exists in the first place.
Well, Tim, there's a sort of challenging question straight in there then. You've been around for 60 years. You were set up to solve a market failure in construction. I think for as long as I've been in construction, we've had 250,000 people short in the sector. Is CITB succeeding at what it does, or is this somebody else is it sort of a problem within the industry and that market failure is still there?
So I think there's two parts of the question, if I can, Mark. And one is, what's the role of industry and what's the role of CITB? So if I can perhaps be guilty of giving you a long answer here, is that when the CITB job first come up, I'd been retired 2 years and I'd spent a long time in education and training prior to that. And they asked me if I was interested in CITB, and I said, well, only if I can change things. And that obviously worked, because I'm here and I've been here for a while now, kind of thing. But when I try to explain to people what CITB does, particularly those that don't understand construction, I describe CITB as the training department for the construction industry. Now, I started my life as an apprentice gas service engineer, and then within a few years I went into the training department at British Gas. So I've got an understanding about that, how that training department works. So a training department is there to support the operational side of a business, and support ultimately the chief exec to meet his or her vision. Now, if you apply that analogy to the construction industry, which is we are the training department for the construction industry, we are here to support the construction industry to deliver their operational programs. So that's where we've tried to position CITB. Now, all analogies fail at some point, but actually the more I have explored this analogy, the more I've felt it's just a really, really good fit. And then the second part is the role of industry. And if you look at how industry works now, that's obviously been changing throughout that period. But what we have currently is a smaller number of very large businesses, the tier ones, if you like, who don't employ the majority of people that do the work. That's delivered by the supply chain. And then the supply chain has their own supply chain. So it inevitably gets the requirement of skills, if you like, is kind of delegated down through the supply chain. And it nearly always ends up somewhere on a building site, no matter how big, with an individual who's self-employed. Now, the smaller the business, the harder it is to invest in training, and the more expensive it is to invest in training, and the more difficult it is because you lose more productivity. Because if you have 10 people working for you, you lose one person for a day, that's 10% of your workforce that's gone. So you can see the dynamics here. So this is what we've tried to grapple with in terms of where does CITB fit with that, and then what's the role of the industry, and what's the construct of the industry.
Okay, so it's a sort of a partnership between CITB as a training department and industry to make this work. So I mean, what would change if we had these 250,000 people coming into the industry? What would actually change? How would we see as an outside observer of the industry? What would be different?
So, what would be different? I think the availability of skills, and very often when we talk about CITB, we talk about trades, but in actual fact, we really ought to be broader than just the trades as well. But let's just keep this for the trades, just to make the point. The availability of trades, I think, would be more instant, and actually, the cost of labour would be the cost of skills would be cheaper as well. I suspect if we did an economic piece of research on the cost of our workforce, we are paying a premium because there is a shortage and it's supply and demand. Okay, now if we were to address that particular issue, it would mean that the industry has to invest in more trainees. And this is where the problem lies, because the industry wants skilled people. What it is more reluctant to do is to invest in trainees to get the skilled people. And that's the bridge that we need to build to solve the problem.
So, I mean, I think that I absolutely get that. That bridge is really important to make that leap from education into construction, and you'll come on to the pillars that are going to try and enable that. I mean, construction, you're right, is one of the highest paid sectors in the UK, isn't it? We've got some very high, well-paid people because of the supply and demand requirements. And so, for me, getting that speed and that cost down is a really beneficial solution. I was going to then come on to your pillars. Do you want to just describe the three pillars that we've got that we have within the business plan, how you hope to work with those? And then we'll pick those apart individually.
Sure. So, in order to get to those pillars, I think we were very conscious at the time. So I come in just after the last consensus, and industry give us some very clear messages about what they want CITB to do and what they don't want CITB to do. And it was very clear to me that there was lots and lots of stuff happening, but I couldn't actually package it to say what will it achieve. So they're all good in their own right, but when you add them all together, what will be different in the end state? And that's the bit where it become more and more tenuous. So we felt as an organisation that we had to regroup and be really clear what our focus is about. And it's about solving the skills problem. It's about making sure there's an availability of skills, if you like. So our vision is to deliver a skilled and productive workforce. That means that people have got access to skills when and where they need it. And Mark, having given you that long answer, I forgot the original question now, so you might have to remind me.
Well, I think it's good you start with the vision, Tim, because the vision is change, and businesses today have a vision and they have a purpose that falls out of that vision. And
That's right. Yeah.
I think that vision that you've given the CITB, and you've taken all your stakeholders through that process, is a really valuable piece of work, because, as you say, it provides that definition for the team to explain what you're there to do.
Sure.
And I think that works really well. But just so you've done the vision, and then from that you've got three pillars which really identify your work streams. And I was just going to say, ask you to explain what the priority of those and what they represent.
Yeah. So in order to meet that vision, we felt there are three fundamental issues to sort out. And the first one is the pipeline of people coming into construction in the first place. And this is probably the loudest voice I've heard, or the loudest complaint about where we are currently, is around, can we get people from schools? The industry is not attracting enough people. We don't sell ourselves particularly well. So the first pillar is about attracting people into the construction industry. The second pillar is, once we've done that, is addressing the skills system. And I always felt that CITB was about creating a skills system rather than having a pocket money to give to industry because they give us their levy. Okay. And when I talk about a skills system, what I'm talking about here is having training providers out there that can train people on the kind of skills that we want. And that's both new entrants and upskilling, that we have the right qualifications and short courses, which includes the apprenticeships. But the quality of provision is also understood as well. And latterly, it's that route way. So if somebody starts an apprentice, how do they develop their career, that continuous lifelong learning, so that they will get the opportunity of becoming a CEO or a business founder or a mentor or a manager, wherever they would want to be. So that's the second pillar. And then the third pillar is upskilling the industry from where we are. So we've recognised that as a sector, our productivity story is not a good one. We've not improved productivity over the last 20 years, or very slightly, and we've not kept up pace. And in order to do that, we need more skills, we need a broader range of skills, and we need a lot sharper set of skills as well. So they're the three pillars. It's the pipeline of people, that skills system, and it's upskilling people once they're in there.
Brilliant. I mean, that's a really round, it's a tangible, logical story, isn't it? Let's bring people in, make sure they're competent, and then keep them competent. That for me is exactly what the CITB should be doing, isn't it, for most of our industry? But
the thing about that story, Mark, is you can get your head around it in terms of what CITB doing. And this was a big question when I first got here. Was CITB should be doing everything. Well, frankly, guys, we can't. So let's be clear on what it is that we are doing. And if we all understand what we can be doing, then we can all have a debate about how best to get there.
Brilliant. So Tim, let's start with pillar one then, getting people into the industry. My understanding is that you're not allowed to deal with people under the age of 16. You're not allowed to train people under the age of 16. Is that a problem for you in that, or does the Secretary of State sort of turn a blind eye to what we're doing there?
It is a problem. If I had a magic wand, I would say that some of the work that we can do can start much earlier. I think I read somewhere that people start choosing their career at the age of 9, around the age of 9. So by the time we get to them at 16, they've already made choices, and it's a little bit too late for an awful lot of people. So I would like it changed, but because we're a government instrument, or an instrument of government, we are defined by our legislation. And it makes it very difficult for CITB to go beyond that legislation, because we'll get our knuckles wrapped, and it's as simple as that. But there are things that we can do. There are messages. We can arm our industry with information. And I think this is one of the areas, Mark. I think this, perhaps, as I indicated earlier, one of the most contentious areas, because since I've been here, people said CITB ought to be in schools, and actually we can't, because there's hundreds and hundreds of schools, and we haven't got hundreds and hundreds of people to be able to do that. Actually, I think it's industry's job to go into schools and sell their businesses and sell their industry. However, CITB can be more supportive and helpful to give employers the support and materials and stories and all that kind of stuff to help industry. So there are things that we can do. We can blur the boundaries of that pre-16 cut-off.
And do you think the T levels are going to help you on that mission, getting employers involved in education? Because the T levels are a new form of training coming out, replacing A levels, and require a large amount of time spent by employers engaging with the schools and colleges to make these things a reality. Are they going to help that process?
I think the concept of T level is a helpful concept, because the ages of you and I now, it's always you go through school and then you get funneled into going to university if you are bright, and if you're not, then you'll have to do something else like construction. So T levels are helpful because they recognise that there are alternatives to going to university. So creating a vocational route way from school is a really helpful thing. But it's not going to solve it by itself. So the numbers going through T levels are quite small, and it works in the two T levels we've got. One works really well, one is more challenging in terms of its success. So I think there's a little bit of work to do there. So I kind of like T levels as a concept, but in terms of their numbers, they're still quite small, and we need to expand that. What I'd really like to do, though, is to expand the concept of having more vocationally related learning in school. And for those that learn with the hands rather than the head, doesn't make them any less brighter, by the way. It just means that they learn different, and that applies to me. I left school with no level in woodwork. I learnt with my hands. So we need to expand that offering, I think, broader than just T levels. But T levels, oh, they're good at what they do, and we just need to broaden that out.
Yeah. I mean, there is an argument that says that those that use their hands are going to be the kingpins in the industry, because us desk jockeys are going to have to keep an eye over our shoulders to see where artificial intelligence is going to start replacing us.
Well, that's a whole different story. I'm probably not qualified to say there, but if you'd have said to me at school I'd been chief executive, I would have laughed you, because it just wasn't an option for kids like myself at that time. And lo and behold, you learn a trade, you get into a job, and actually somebody says, actually, I think you're quite bright, and I think you can do another job. And what we need to do is to stop that limiting, that career limiting thought process for people that aren't successful at school, and actually say, but you can be really successful in this area, but only if you engage in lifelong learning in order to do it. And that's the key.
Yeah, we'll come on to lifelong learning later, because it's a key element of mine. I mean, I think one of the challenges I think we have is, how do we attract young people into the industry? And one of the questions I might ask you is whether you think education per se is fit for purpose. So I was presenting at a conference actually with you, and one of the questions asked was, do we think the education system is fit for purpose for the use within the industry? Does the FE sector work well enough? Does the university sector work well enough to give us the skills and the people we need? And there were very mixed responses to that question. I just wonder what your view might be.
I think that's a really big question, Mark. Having spent 5 years on the board of Ofqual as well, I kind of understood an insight. And I went through all of those qualification reforms in Ofqual, knowing that all of these reforms would have made me a failure as a kid. And whilst I thoroughly enjoyed my time there and I learned an awful lot, I still had this nagging doubt around, but this only works for those that learn with the head, So is it fit for purpose? I would like it to understand that success is not just around the qualifications you get. Success is preparing yourself for the future life. And the future life that a lot of people are looking for, then construction offers that opportunity. And actually, construction offers an opportunity almost like no other sector, because it just engages everybody, from those who aren't going to work at school, and they're not, they're never going to be a chief exec or a manager as such, but actually they can earn really good money and contribute to society and the construction industry, right up to the brightest of the bright who are going to come in and be a high flyer. And it gives you that opportunity. And I think what happens is, when we leave school, we then find construction or sectors like construction, rather than school preparing individuals for a career in construction. So I do think we need to challenge our education system more than we do it.
Yeah.
And I do think it needs to be less academic. And the FE colleges, I think we need to challenge FE to be more aligned to what employers are asking for, rather than where I think they're currently focused, which is more aligned to what the individual needs are.
Yeah.
So I think there's work to do on both those areas.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm a governor of a construction college, and certainly the student reports are given far more credit than the employer reports that come through. It's the student feedback is far more important to us, and because they're the people effectively we have to make sure come to the college to pay for their education.
And this is where I think it's never quite as simple as one or the other, is it?
No, it isn't. No.
If you're developing a skills system, the skills system has to meet the needs of employers. And at the moment, I feel it's too focused on the needs of individuals.
Yeah.
And the other thing, it's a one-size-fits-all approach, so there's a kind of a requirement to get to level 3. Well, actually, in construction, you can perform really well at level 1, at level 2, and level 3, and 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I do think it needs to pivot more towards what employers are asking for, and have a better balance than we currently got.
Yeah. So just staying with employers and pillar one then, I mean, one of the, your business plan is unapologetically looking to diversify the people we have within the industry.
Yeah.
Could you just explain why that's important? Because I think that's often missed by many employers as why that diversity is absolutely crucial to survival.
Well, if you take gender as an easy one, so in the trades, 2% of our trades are women. You know, I think 1% of some of the apprenticeship trades are women. I mean, there's a scandal. This is an industry that's been saying there's a skill shortage for a long time, and yet we only recruit half the population. So, and EDI at the moment is a hot topic around the world, and rather than it being I don't know, a political point scoring topic at the moment, if you look at the economic needs of our industry, we actually need that diversity. Now, on top of that, gender, if you take diversity of thought, so, we are very much entrenched in how we do things. And one of the things I found running executive teams is the more diverse thought, the more expansive your thinking lies. And some of the ideas come from some really odd places which I would have never thought of. And it's only because people have a different way of looking at things. So the more expansive and the more inclusive we are, and I've mentioned gender, but you can talk about race, you can talk about faith, you can talk about sexuality, look at all those things. Ultimately, when you strip all those away, you've got human beings. And if we have an industry that is genuinely attractive to all human beings, then actually we have a bigger pool to choose from. We can be more selective, blah, blah, blah. It's just a no-brainer for me, Mark. It really is.
Tim, I'm absolutely with you on this. And I think, particularly when you have an industry in change, that diversity of thought is absolutely crucial to making sure that you're going to be able to see the opportunities that are out there to be able to grab those opportunities to make the difference that the successes your businesses will rely on. And that diversity is crucial.
Absolutely. And, I've seen some of the training providers in particular. And one training provider, which I'm kind of thinking about now, has come from a family-owned construction business, and they were fed up with the training offer around their area. So they set up their own business. They had no experience in training provision. They just sat and the leaders of that training provider said, we sat around our kitchen table with our mum and we developed this new concept, and they brought in new ideas and training. I've been in training all my life, so I think I understand it. And they come up with some ideas I'd never heard of before. And that's just, and I think they're brilliant. I think they're absolutely some wonderful stuff. And it's that where we need to create space for those disruptors.
Yeah,
and we don't, because we just get entrenched in our ideas that you can only do it this way. Actually, you can't. There's a million and one ways to do things. So we need to be more inclusive for sure.
Brilliant. And just coming on to pillar two now, Tim, because I'm aware we could spend a long time just on the first pillar. Do you want to talk about the role of the employer networks? Because I know this is something that you've created, is the concept of employer networks, and what their role is, particularly within pillar two, making sure that the quality of education is appropriate for industry, because that's, as we mentioned earlier, one of the key requirements of an education system.
So start from the premise that the best determination of quality comes from the employer, the end user. If you're going to buy a lawnmower, it's you that can determine if that lawnmower is going to be quality, not the person that's selling it to you. Okay. So the employer networks are there to create a local group of employers that can determine their own training needs, and it was setting the employer networks off so that the employers would have a much stronger voice within CITB, and also it's a delivery mechanism of CITB to get our voice out there. I felt CITB was in the middle between industry and training, and then we collected the levy, and then we determined where the levy should be going. It just seems an absurd process where actually we should be guardians of the levy, but employers really should be directing where that money should be going. And we can offer some thought some leadership of thought on top of that, of course. Otherwise, you'll just get what you've currently got. So there needs to be a reframing of the relationship and partnership between CITB and industry. So the employee networks was the first stab at doing that, and they said, look, if you can organise yourselves locally, we will take away some of the barriers that you've been saying around accessing training, which includes the levy, and we've put those have been in existence now for 2 years as we've been developing the network, and they've just been the most overwhelming success. And one of the things that we did last year was we offered industry 100% funding through the employee networks to look at future skills, productivity things. EDI would be on there as well, digital skills, all those kind of things. And it's overperformed by 300%.
I mean, Tim, that's brilliant news, because one of the challenges I see in my college is how do we capture those skills, future skills in the industry. Our industry is fantastically good at looking backwards to see how it solved problems, and it's like, I've done it before, therefore this is going to work today. And they're not appreciating some of the concepts that are changing, some of the productivity issues, technology, green, which are going to radically change people's careers.
It is.
And so trying to get that, I'm really pleased to hear you saying it's a success in picking up those sort of issues.
Well, we have a mechanism now to deliver those ideas through. Not all the ideas are going to work. Some are going to fall flat for sure. But the next iteration of the employer network is the train provider network. And when you plug in a train provider network into the employer network, what you've created is a local ecosystem of employers who are clear on their demand for skills. You have the train providers that's plugged into that local ecosystem, so they can reflect on their business model to then develop their offering so that employers get what they want. So the train provider network will be coming out at the end of the first quarter this year. So that'll evolve even further. But just going back to we are the training department for the industry kind of model. One of the little anecdotes I always share is when you ask the operations team what they want, they will tell you the here and now stuff. So if they have a problem with X, can you deliver training to meet X? Okay. What you don't get is what the future looks like. And that you need that additional input. So if you talk to the management of the team, they'll say, well, the organisation is changing, it's going in a different direction. We need to be more aligned to ABC. Now, what we need as an industry is to change our culture. We need to change our productivity. We need to change the way we use technology. Now, that's the additional thought leadership that we can put into those employee networks. But the point is, we now have a mechanism to put those ideas into industry, whereas I felt before we didn't have that mechanism.
Brilliant. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the C word, because for me, it is all around changing the culture in the industry. We have to accept we need more people, more young people, and a different way of training people in the sector. So if those employers groups can bring that culture change, and that's brilliant. But one of the questions I had is, do you see these hubs really as regional hubs where they can address the skills in a specific area? And if so, you're looking, so how many of those are going to be scattered around the country? Are they, in county-wide, region-wide? It's an interesting concept.
Well, they will be where there's demand for them. So I think there's about 37 or something like that now. So they're absolutely developing, and then we lately put them into Scotland. Scotland's a different skill system, so there's a slightly different way of using those. So we will create them where employers can come together and say there's a need for one here. Then we're open-minded about where that goes. But we need to add to a regional focus this sector focus as well. So on top of the employer networks, we've now developed sector plans, or we're developing sector plans. So the first one we got off the ground is house building, home building, where once again, we put the onus on industry to determine where their priorities ought to be. And that means that CITB then has to listen to what industry is saying in terms of where priorities are. And there is some influence on how we use the levy as well. So we can apply funds to that. Our bottomless pit is becoming shorter, actually. They're becoming a little bit too successful. So they are draining the the levy a little bit too well, which is a good thing. But you need that sector focus as well as that regional focus. And I think once you've got that combined, then I think you've got a really good comprehensive offer.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a challenge to get that both those two tenets, but also looking forward to see how that's going to impact the skills you need. Because one of the things I think construction is good at is giving careers, not jobs. And,
Absolutely.
and
And on that point, and I've used this stat to indicate the challenges that industry we need to sort out, or we need to sort out with industry, is that the industry recruited about 200,000 people last year. It lost about 200,000 people. So it has a very leaky bucket, and it's working way too hard on retraining people, on bringing new people in, when actually if we kept the people in the first place, we wouldn't have to train half as hard. So there's a very inefficient way the industry has of working and training its workforce.
But I mean, what's that churn rate? That's still a sort of a 10% churn rate in the industry, isn't it? We employ something over between 2 and 3 million people a year. Oh, well, 2 or 3 million. So it's a 10% churn rate, which it's not in a lot of industries would be seen as reasonable. So I don't know. I mean, I agree. If we can hold on to them, it solves the problem, doesn't it? But I suspect it's quite a challenge.
I suppose it depends why there's a churn, and when we are churning skilled people, then that's obviously more expensive than churning somebody that's just started and actually determined it's not for them, and that's fine. Just we all have that. We all have to do that. But when you lose skilled people out of the industry that says, you know what, I'm going to work in Amazon's warehouse because I've got this security of work, then there's a real loss there that the industry really needs to look at.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always reminded of the forces. I mean, they lose nearly 15,000 people a year. And a lot of, they spend their life training. I mean, that's what happens in the forces, isn't it? You don't go to war, you train for war all the time.
Yes,
and they still lose a lot of people. So it's they're well over 10% of their workforce of effect of their workforce is leaving each year, and it's a hell of a cost, I suspect, to the government to keep them trained and employed.
It's a very expensive way of running a business, though, isn't it?
Oh, it is hugely, hugely. Well, as you brought up some numbers, Tim, let me just ask you that Skills England are putting 600 million into our industry.
Yeah.
60,000 people, that's £10,000 per person. That's sort of 1 year at university or possibly 2 at an FE colleges. Do you think is that going to make a significant difference? I mean, we've got 1.5 billion houses to build. Is that going to make a difference?
Of course, it's going to make a difference. It absolutely will. And money's tight at the minute. So for our industry to influence government to spend or make this kind of investment is a real coup. I think across the industry, I think we should be really very proud of ourselves that we've managed to be able to do that. And I think construction is very clearly part of this government's growth strategy. It underpins a lot of their priority sectors as such. We made a compelling argument, and I say it's the people in CLC and CITB have carried that interface into government and made the case for industry. Obviously was compelling enough. So the important point is, how do we spend that money? And we're still working through the detail of that, Mark, as you would expect. If we spent the money doing what we're doing now, I think we'll waste a lot of it. I think what is a precondition of spending that money is there is change in how we develop skills. So it's making sure that the FE colleges I think if the FE colleges had a different funding approach whereby they were funded on job outcomes as opposed to qualification outcomes, actually what you'd find is some of the average performer colleges would shoot up to a good performer colleges because they're more attuned with what vocational training is. It would expose some of the colleges, but that's another issue. But that bridge between training and industry, that's what that £600 million has to focus on. So if we can be much more efficient in making sure that those who enter training in construction actually get a job, it will make a huge difference. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
I mean, that would be a really good use of funds, wouldn't it, Tim? If we can, we're losing nearly half the people who start the apprentice, fail to finish it and move into the industry.
Yeah.
If we could even just half that and get, it would be an enormous impact for the industry and provide a whole load of skills. So I can see some benefit in that. That's assuming we can make sure that we can get the apprentices right. And I'm also pleased your view on skills, but on the FE colleges, because there are some cracking FE colleges out there. And if it starts to separate the good from the bad, and we train on outcomes, we might start getting more people into the industry as well. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I've moved my position on FE college because I thought actually a lot of the FE colleges are part of the problem. And when I went to look round and saw the work that they're doing, I mean, the one local to me is Stevenson's College. We have two college principals on our board. I was just blown away by the amount of personal energy that the trainers and the management team of FE colleges put into these people. It's almost a personal mission to get them a job or a qualification at the end of that. You know, some of these people that we train, not just in construction, but some of the people at FE colleges have perhaps not had that parental guidance to give them that coaching that maybe you and I had, hopefully you and I had.
Yeah.
You know, so it absolutely, it's embracing what colleges offer to give us a better outcome that we've got, because colleges just do some fabulous work. They really do.
Yeah. I mean, the previous person on the building podcast was Polly Harrow, who's the FE commissioner for students. So she represents students to the government to say what the impact on students is going to be for any policy changes. And she's the view that there's a widening gulf between the end of education and the start of employment.
Yeah.
And you know, we've got students with far more trauma coming through that needs to be solved and supported far more than there ever used to be.
I think, excuse me, one of the things that FE college principals have been telling me is that there's a difference post-COVID. And as you've said, there's much more support needed for those individuals, which is when you tap into the expertise of FE colleges, you get a really smart understanding of what problems lie. And I think that's the idea behind the Train Provider Network, is to tap into that expertise. But it's all doable. There's nothing insurmountable. We just need a better understanding of what's the problem we're trying to fix.
Yeah,
and
I think it does take some money as well, though, Tim, doesn't it? I mean, it takes some resource to fix it. I mean, the FE sector's been underfunded for so many years.
Yeah,
I mean, effectively, I sort of liken my college. We've got students for twice as long as universities, and we're paid half as much per student. I mean,
yeah,
and it's a real challenge.
I think that will always be the case, and it will always be the case that FE colleges are stretched because it's government funded, and you know, they've never been known to be overly generous when it comes to funding. But some of the principles have said to me is if you rework where the funding comes from, you can actually release more money to spend on those students as well. And I think you'll be more familiar with this than I have. And I think this is the thing that we have to do with the £600 million, the mission boards that surrounding the £600 million, is to actually create that very influential senior level voice from our industry that says, this is what we want from RFE colleges. Once we articulate that, then we'll make sure that the funding is associated to that, and then we can hold the colleges to account properly to that. And that's really what we're heading towards.
Brilliant. Well, look, let's come on to pillar 3, Tim, before we completely run out of time, because for me, keeping people in employment and making sure they're competent for their jobs, particularly the Building Safety Act requirements of having a competent workforce. Do you want to just sort of talk around some of the work that you're doing under pillar 3? Because for me, this is all about keeping people in the sector.
It is. It's keeping people in the sector and growing their skills as well, developing their skills. And in fairness, I think I'd like to do some more analysis on this, but it feels to me as though once you've qualified, then that's when your learning finishes, formal learning finishes. Now, we all learn every day is a learning day. You know, every tradesperson will say there's always something you can learn. I've never had any tradesperson say anything different. But capturing that formally is not something this industry does. So actually, we can't tell who's a really skilled, experienced person from somebody that's coming late in life, that's new on a building site, that can hold the tools, that can do a basic job. We just can't distinguish between those two extremes. And I think it would be really neat for us to be able to do that. You've mentioned culture. If we were to develop our management and leadership skills around how to run a business as well, because very often you learn a trade and then you decide you want to go on your own, you develop your business, you've got all the trade skills that you need, but you've no idea how to run a business. I think we need to be broader in our thinking around what skills do we need for construction rather than just those trades. But I do think we need a clearer, a more visible route, and the ability to access it as well. So, very often people tell me I can get the training, but it's 300 miles away in Cornwall somewhere, and I'm in Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
So, and that's again, that's the idea behind the training provider network. So that's the pillar 3. It's to make sure there's the availability and accessibility of training that progresses you through your career.
Brilliant. Well, we might come back to that on what lifelong learning looks like, but just as a side from what you were talking on there, to moving from off the tools and into management, it surprises me, and I'm looking that, so it surprises me that the one area we've got rid of grandfather rights across the industry. So the ability to just say I'm competent because I've done it before has gone from across the board, except for our construction, the boards of our industries, boards of our companies. Still, you can be a director on grandfather rights. There's no requirement for any training whatsoever to be a board director. And
Yes.
actually that sets the whole scene, it sets the culture, it sets everything within the sector. And it surprises me that an industry that's got rid of grandfather rights has decided that the one place where they can make the biggest impact, they've still got them in spades. So
yeah, and it's not just construction, isn't it? I've seen some people on boards which I won't clearly not mention here. And for the life of me, I've never understood how they got there in the first place, let alone managing to keep their job. But on a building site, you would be exposed very quickly, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you look at somewhere like ISG went bust, and not a qualified director on the board. I mean, qualified in their professions possibly, but not as how to run a directorship.
Yeah, and most businesses, particularly in construction, they fail not because of the shortage of work. It's
well, it's the other way. It's you run out of cash because you've got too much work, haven't you? That's
yes, exactly.
generally what happens.
It's how to manage and lead it, and it's yeah, I completely agree with you. I think we need competence at all levels.
Yeah. So just talk to me about lifelong learning then, Tim, because that's something, if we're going to, as you say, finish an apprenticeship and we think we're trained and qualified, how do you see lifelong learning sort of hitting the sector?
I think it's first thing is, what are the opportunities? So, when I finished my apprenticeship, I worked for British Gas, and they were nationalised at the time, actually, although shortly denationalised. It was very clear to me what I could do next. So I went and did a BTEC course, and then if I wanted to go any further, I could go further again. And once you've qualified as an apprentice, let's say a bricklayer or a carpenter or even a site manager, it's what next? And that visibility of what next is just not there. Where do you go? So it relies on the individual to do their own research, which, is not always a bad thing, but we can make it an awful lot simpler and easier to access than we currently have. And what would it mean for somebody who's just qualified that says, actually, I fancy running my own business? What do you need in order to get there? Because what happens now is, once they get there, then they find out how incompetent they are, which is what we've all been there, haven't we? Actually, if we can say to them, these are the skills that you need to run an effective business, you might need to start thinking of these before you jump from one area to the other. And here's how you access it. And here's the support you get from CITB or not, if we are funding it or not. And it's that visibility, I think, for me, Mark. I think that's the first thing that we can do to be more helpful.
I mean, to do that, you're talking about sort of a series of short courses, and then accrediting or making sure those short courses are a reasonable or acceptable standard, and that's presumably where your employer networks can help out on that. But it's then recording it and making sure you've got a record of that training and those qualifications.
So that's exactly it. So if you look at other bodies who are very often, the professional institutions provide a really good model and helpful model, and it appears that in construction that professional status only happens at a certain level, and I think we're missing something there. So if you had a professional body that would guide you through, what does CPD look like, what does accredited learning look like, what does what does a learning program look and how do we capture that? Because a lot of learning you can do reading the Times on a Sunday morning, or you can look at TikTok video, and you can actually learn in all different ways. But
Or you
what
can
you
listen
need,
to podcasts, Tim. That's very important.
and obviously I was just coming to that, Mark, and listening to podcasts is an important part. But what would count as created learning? Actually, all of this is useful. It's how do we then build that up to say, actually, this is worthy of some recognition. And it's that recognition we don't have until you get to a certain profession, what we consider to be a professional level, which
Yeah.
I would challenge my own word in there, because I always felt I was professional once I'm qualified to be a gas service engineer. But anyway, that's by the by.
Well, I mean, I think clearly you've been excelled as a gas engineer and moved well above being, or well beyond being a gas engineer. But very useful to have somebody who understands how the apprenticeship works and some of those challenges when you're responsible for training in an industry. Um, I suppose so. My last question on lifelong learning is really around the culture, because for me, we are an industry of small businesses. 95% of our industry of our companies are sub 5 people, and 98% are below 10 people. And you've identified that challenge right at the beginning of this podcast about how you take one person out of a group of 10, that's 10% of the workforce gone.
Yeah.
How do we go around changing that culture in the sector?
So the normal, what we consider how we train people is we have to shift our thinking there, because within construction, because we are small businesses, we tend to live from, and this is not just construction, by the way, this is every sector. So this is, I'm caricaturing it just to make the point, is we tend to live from one project to the next. So the horizon, the pipeline of work is very rarely beyond 2 or 3 months. So it's perfectly understandable that people are more concerned about getting more work than developing their professional understanding. That's just survival. That's absolutely normal. But it's where to access learning. And very often, if I want to do some learning, I can sit with my laptop on my knee, and I can open my laptop and I can learn something that I particularly want to do, and I'll focus in on that one. And it's about bringing those learning, different ways of learning, that more, or augmented learning, for example, that digital kind of learning. There's an awful lot we can do where you can give it to people who sat there with the dinner on the lap, and they can open the laptop and they can do it whilst they're doing. And then we can capture that. If it's done digitally, you can capture that quite easy. So there's something that we need to look at in and challenge our way of what counts as learning and how do we deliver the learning. And I'm constantly challenging my team to say we have to deliver the learning where it's taking place, not where we want them to come to.
Yep.
Yeah, and we
Hallelujah.
have a college
Yes.
in Norfolk, as
It's
staff from Edinburgh
it's
as
a long way
well,
from anywhere. Yes.
which is a long way from anywhere, and you've really got to want to go there to get there. But and then that's entirely appropriate for for the training that we do. But an awful lot of training takes place that doesn't need for people to go there. And if I can get my trainers to sort of go around, we haven't got that luxury yet. We will get there soon. If we can do it digitally and record it, then that's where we need to be heading with our learning.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always reminded that Rolls-Royce maintain Rolls-Royce engines around the world, and generally there's a small technician on one with the spanner, and then it's all dealt with in Derby
Yeah.
online, and and they're maintaining them perfectly acceptably around the world without having to travel. Technology can be made to work.
Exactly, and it's proven now. We don't have to. We don't think this is new stuff. It's not new
No.
stuff. We've just been very slow to adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim, we've had a great run through all sorts of areas, and it's a huge topic, and we could spend a long time looking at each one of these things. I was sort of going to ask you sort of really to sum up those three pillars and just say what is it that you need industry to do to allow you to deliver the business plan that you presented to the industry to actually vote on, because we're in the middle of consensus at the moment.
We are, yeah.
And it'd be interesting to hear from you what do we have to do to allow you to succeed?
I think it's engage. What we've tried to do is to create opportunities for employers to come to us and give us their views.
Okay.
And I think the more employers engage with that process, the more informed we are going to be and the better the solutions that we are going to do to offer. So that would be the first thing is, and I think the employer networks, going back to that one, what we've seen in the employer networks is a lot of disengaged employers that have just got fed up with CITB are actually coming back now because they now feel they have a voice and it's being listened to as such. So that's the first thing, is get involved, give us your views, that's fine. And then the second thing is, as an industry, I suppose it's my call to industry, is we are constantly talking about the lack of training that we do. Actually, we do loads of training. That's not the issue. The issue that we have is employers investing in trainees, and there's a big gap there. So if we can invest in trainees rather than just thinking there's experienced people out there, then actually we'll develop those routeways, that qualification system, that learning system. So those two things I think are really important. And then we can do this together. So we can actually be the training department for the industry, working on your counsel and your good advice, rather than CITB thinking how best can we spend and offer your money back to you.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that last point, Tim, because I mean, we have the best in class is a 5% club in the industry, isn't it? You have 5% of your employees should be trainees or apprentices. I used to run the 10%. When I used to run a construction company, we used to be 10% because we had a very low churn rate. And I worked on the basis that the average life was 40 years in the industry. The average time to train somebody was 4 years. Therefore, 10% of my workforce had to be trainees. It was a very straightforward sum. And then when everybody tells me it's 5%, I think, well, it was only half the job.
Well, it's interesting that you put two things together, that you invested in 10% and you have a very low churn rate. That is not unusual, for an industry that's seeking security. Then I would be looking for an employer that actually wants to invest in me as well. If I were to choose an employer, that's exactly what I'd be looking for.
But and people are misguided when they think employees don't want to do it. I mean, we've set up a company that we have a 3% retention on salary that goes into an escrow account that is used for training. So if they want to do some training, if it suits what we want them to do, then we'll match it or more than match it. If it doesn't, then they can go and train themselves in something else that's there. But it's there for training. And I would thought it would be a very negative thing, but actually it's been a very positive thing. I've got, everybody's really very grateful to have that opportunity, that they're going to remain current in their industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what we need to do is champion more employers like yourself, Mark, that do exactly that. I'll take the opportunity when I get the chance.
Yeah, no, well, Tim, it's been a great conversation around about some of the challenges you've got, some of the plans you've got for the CITB. Really great. You've got some new focus in on what's happening and how you're going to address the skills shortage. And really great that you see it's the industry's got to do their bit and step up to do their bit. And if you can be part of the culture change that's going to make that happen, then fantastic. We might get there. We might get those 250,000 that we all dream of to deliver the 1.5 million homes that we've got to do by the end of the decade.
It's my pleasure. I'm loving the journey, but still a lot of work to do.
Great. Tim, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.